G'day everybody, Ray Munday here, Team Associated J Concepts Reedy factory driver here in Australia. Welcome to this video on tyre traction. Traction, we all want it, right? Doesn't matter whether we race on-road, off-road, crawling, we want traction. And I see people spend a lot of time, effort and money on choosing the right tyre and changing their setup. But what I see missing is the really crucial element of how you drive to create traction. Your driving style can either add traction or take away traction from your car. And what I'd like to cover in this video are three fundamental characteristics of tyres that if you can adapt your driving style to these, you'll be able to generate more traction without any other changes to your car. So firstly, a bit of a recap. Why is traction important? If we go to laws of physics, force equals mass times acceleration. Traction is the force that the tyre pushes the car with. The more force you get, the more traction force, the more the car will accelerate. And what this means is we come out of a corner and we accelerate with the power. The more traction we've got, the faster the car gets up to speed. As we come to the end of the straight and we hit the brakes, more traction means the car brakes quicker, which means we can brake later, carry more speed. And going through corners, you need what's called lateral acceleration, the tyre pushing the car around the corner. The more traction we have, the more lateral acceleration we have, which means we can hold a higher speed through corners. All of these things mean we can go faster on the straight, faster through the corners. We get better lap times, which is the goal of racing. So I'm going to use a little whiteboard here with a few graphs on it to talk about these characteristics of the tyres. The first one's a pretty simple one. All tyres, no matter what type they are, the traction goes up as you put load on the tyre. So as there's more load pushing down on the tyre, in this graph here, the more load on the tyre, the traction force goes up. It's not quite linear. You put twice as much load on a tyre, it doesn't quite give you twice as much more traction, but you do get more traction when there's load on a tyre. So how can we use this? Well, there's a couple of examples. Firstly, most easy one, when you're in the air, there's no traction on your tyre. So don't try to do anything with your steering and brakes in the air to make the car change direction. You can do some jump control, but you're not going to change the direction of the car. But as we're going over elevations and humps in the track, as the car is getting light over a hump, you're not going to have as much traction on your tyre. It doesn't matter what you try to do. But when you're at the bottom of a hump, so either when you're about to rise up a hill or go up a jump, or your car's just landed off a jump, your tyres are being pushed hard into the ground. That's where you've got a lot of traction. So you can use that when you walk around a track and look at where the car's going to be sucked into the ground or going over the ground. Where it's going to be sucked into the ground, you've got more traction. You can attack that section harder. You can pull the throttle harder. Really good example, going up a jump. If you try to accelerate too early before a jump, sometimes you get wheel spin, but just as you go up the face of the jump, you can see the car squashes right in. You can really mash the throttle and the car will punch out of there really hard. Our second example of how we can use this, two-wheel drive is a really clear example. Under acceleration, you get weight transfer to the back of the car. So as you accelerate harder, more weight will transfer to the back of your car. So how do we use this in our driving style? Well, if you punch the throttle from standstill, your car hasn't transferred weight yet, you might not actually have enough grip in your tyres and you'll just spin the tyres. Once the car starts to accelerate, you have more load on the back of the car, on the driving tyres, they'll get more traction. So if you start by accelerating a bit smoother, and as the car starts to accelerate, it transfers weight, there's more load on those rear tyres, they have more traction, you can pull the throttle harder. As you pull the throttle harder, it'll accelerate harder, transfer more weight, etc. So, especially with mid-motor buggies, it's really critical to pull the throttle really smoothly, but keep pulling it. If you're too gentle, you don't get enough weight transfer, you won't get enough load. If you're too aggressive, you'll spin the tyres before they've got load. There's a couple of examples of that first fundamental characteristic of tyres. The second characteristic of tyres that all tyres share is what's called the slip versus traction characteristic. So what we're talking about is how much, either under acceleration, it's how much the tyre is slipping on the ground, or when we're going through a corner, it's the angle that it's slipping at compared to the direction of the car. So this is called either the slip ratio or the slip angle. Now, in my second graph here, we can see tyre slip and the traction. And if we look at the black line first, basically what happens is when you start to do a little bit of slip, so a little bit of spin or just a little bit of steering, the force goes up very linearly. You put a little bit more steering in, the car turns twice as much. But then as you get closer to the limit of the tyre, the amount of traction, you'll see it starts to curve off. And this cross that I've drawn here is the optimum traction. That's the most traction you get out of the tyre. It needs a bit more slip. Once you go past that though, which is really important, is actually the traction starts to drop off. So there's an optimum amount of slip that you need to find in your tyre. Not enough slip, the car will be really easy to drive, but you're not going fast enough. Too much slip, the car's going to look crazy sideways, move around everywhere, but you're not getting the maximum traction out of the tyre. You've got to try to find this maximum traction point. Now, we race on a lot of different surfaces in off-road, and down here in Australia, a lot of them are outdoor. We have tracks that are hard packed, we have tracks that are sandy, we've got tracks that are loamy. And what makes this really challenging is that the amount of slip that you need changes depending on the surface and the tyre. I've drawn here this green line. This is what it feels like on a really soft or loamy surface. You actually maybe don't get quite as much grip, but you need to get more slip to make it happen. You need to slide the car more. You need to get more wheel spin. The red line is what I felt when you're driving on a really polished or really heavily grooved track. They tend to have more traction and the car is more responsive. But once you go past that limit, especially if you're on like slick tires or worn tires, you tend to have a really quick drop off of traction. The really fast guys seem to naturally be able to find this. And you can see a few examples of a couple of different styles. We've all seen Mayfield drive, the way that he Mayfields a car, it's crazy. He's obviously able to find that point of slip and probably just that little bit past it where he's getting all the traction out of the tyre, but the car's moving around a bit. Some of the other drivers, you watch a guy like Spencer, very, very smooth. He's getting a lot of traction out of the car, but he seems to be using minimal inputs. He's probably sitting just this side of the curve on the black line here. So there's a bit of a sweet spot you got to find, but you just got to make sure that you're not too far either way. A few examples of how to use this. Firstly, when it comes to steering, this is a really big one I see. High speed corners and low speed corners. Now in low speed corners, you need to use more steering angle. It's a tighter corner, you need to use more steering angle. But in the really fast corners, you don't need to use much steering angle, but I still see a lot of people just wrench on the wheel. And what's happening is two things. Firstly, you're turning, instead of the tyre turning the car, you're kind of turning it into a brake. That tyre force is trying to slow the car down. But secondly, what you tend to be doing in that is you're actually going way past the optimum point of the tyre. So your front tyre, instead of giving the amount of steering it can up here, you're actually going down into this zone here where the tyre's not gripping that much. So the car's going to understeer through the corner. However, what then happens is when you finish cornering and you straighten back up again, is as you go, you're putting less steering lock on, suddenly your tyre's gripping more. And so as the corner finishes and you straighten up, the car suddenly spins out. I don't know how many times you've seen it. I see that a lot, and I witnessed it a lot at a lot of tracks I've been to. When you're racing on a track, the faster the corner, the bigger the corner, the less steering lock you got to use. On fast corners, you can use a tiny little bit. If you can even try it yourself. Turn your steering EPA down to 10 or 15%, something ridiculously low like that. You'll find you can get around the high-speed corners really well. You don't need to use much steering. The second trick you can use on this is under throttle under acceleration. And I talked before about how you got to be smooth on the throttle. Well, again, when you first accelerate, if you don't have enough slip, if you don't use enough power, you're sitting down in this kind of zone here, you're not getting the most out of your tyre. You paid for all this traction up here, you want to use it. So make sure you're pulling enough throttle that you get just a little bit of wheel spin, but not too much. Once you get enough wheel spin though, that's when the car then starts to squat down on the back, you can punch it a bit harder. But you'll find if you, off the line, really punch it hard, what happens is you go straight to this zone here where you don't have enough traction, and you'll find the car won't accelerate it. It's like it just sits there spinning its tyres but doesn't actually drive forward. To practice this, get down, I'd say on a practice day, and get down actually right next to the car. You can hear the car, you can hear tyre traction, and practice how fast you have to pull the throttle. Practice how quickly you can. When you punch it really hard, you'll actually hear that the car sounds different as the tyres just spin instead of actually driving. And also focus on it as a track changes. If you're driving on a sandy track or a soft track, you'll feel you have to actually punch more and get those tyres spinning, because what you're actually doing He's kind of digging in the surface and making the surface dig. When you're on a really slick track, you need to keep that wheel spin a lot less, more like the red curve here. Characteristic number 3 is what's called the friction circle or the traction circle. Now what this talks about is that your tyre has a certain amount of grip it can give. And when we put it in a format looking like this, this here is how much grip it can give pure forward. So this is pure forward acceleration. Then this line here is how much that's pure braking direction. So this is the tyre pushing forward, like we're looking on top of the tyre here. So it's kind of looking on it like that. Forward traction and braking traction, and then cornering left and right. So the amount of tyre traction that tyre can give is like, it looks like a bit of a circle when you look from the top. Important part about this is the tyre can only give so much at any time. If you're at full forward acceleration, so you're driving as hard as you can and the tyre's on its limit, it doesn't have any cornering grip left. If you're at full braking, it doesn't have any cornering grip left. And if you're at full cornering, you've got no acceleration or braking traction left. So one of the techniques that I've seen, and I've heard people talk about is, okay, come up to a corner, don't accelerate and brake, sorry, don't corner and accelerate or brake at the same time. So you see people, they come up to a corner, they brake, they let go of the brake, they turn, and then they finish turning and then they accelerate. What you're doing here is this green line, where you're using all this bit of traction of the tyre here under braking, and then you're letting off the brake. You're going back to almost no traction, then you're going across to cornering, then you finish cornering, and you let go of the steering, and then you accelerate. Now what's happening here, your car's going to be very stable, it's not going to spin out, but you're not using all this part of the traction that you could use from your tyre. Conversely, you can overdrive your tyre. If you're braking and then you start to turn, well, you've got no cornering grip left of those tyres, your car's going to either spin out or slide off the track. The ideal situation, we want to use all of this traction that's available in our tyre. So we take the example of coming up to a corner. We brake. When we first brake, we're going at full speed. We need to brake and wash some speed off. You brake without any steering, and you're able to use this full traction of the tyre here. But then as you start to want to turn in, you start letting off the brake. So you come off the brake a bit. And as you come off the brake, you blend or transition into steering. So you start steering as you start to let off the brake. And you transition from full brake and around to full steering. So when you're in the middle of the corner and you've got the maximum steering or cornering traction out of the tyre, you're not accelerating, you're not braking, purely cornering. Then as you reach the end of the corner and you want to re-accelerate, you start to take steering off, and as you do that, you start to put the throttle on, and then you blend. And by the time that you're at full throttle, the steering should be straight. When you use this this technique, so this is called trail braking, is what is often used in full-size racing. This is the difference between being a really good driver and an exceptionally good driver, is how well you can use that full area of your traction circle. You use that, you're going to get the most out of your car at all times. Once you start this technique, especially probably the hardest one is the brake into steering. When you get it right, you'll find you can actually brake later than you thought you could. The car will turn more than you thought it was going to turn. But when you first practice it, you're going to spin out a bit, you're going to run wide a bit. It's going to take a bit of practice. This one, definitely get down to the track. Maybe get down and have next to a corner, pick a corner, practice it in your head a little bit and feel, what's it like when I let off the brake? If you let off the brake too quickly, what happens is that the front kind of pops up and then you lose steering. So you actually want to come on the brake and then smoothly let off the brake. And as you smoothly let off the brake, you're steering. This technique is what's going to give you the most traction out of the tyre at all times. Now, two-wheel drive and four-wheel drive, they react a little bit differently, and we can utilise a few of these techniques slightly differently. With a two-wheel drive, it's a little bit easier. We're only working on the rear tyre with the acceleration and the brake. So you've got the ability to do a few more things with the car. Now, one of the things that you might see, especially in like really tight hairpin corners, is how some of the guys at the top are able to make the car just rip through the corner and take off. And what they're using is an additional brake technique. It's kind of like a handbrake turn in rallying. And what's happening is you turn into the corner, and so you're using all this cornering grip here, then you just touch the brake. Now when you do that, there's no more, you're basically going outside the traction of the tyre. The rear will break loose for an instant while you've got the brake on. As soon as you let go of the brake, it'll grip back up again. So with a two-wheel drive, you've got that opportunity to, as you go through a tight corner, just tap the brake a little bit, the rear will flick out, point you where you want to go, and then you get your back lined up, you let go of the brake, and you're ready to go forward again. It doesn't have to be quite that aggressive. If you're in a fast corner and the car's understeering a little bit, you just push just a touch of brake, and the car, you'll take a little bit of traction away from the rear, you transfer a little bit to the front, and the car will tuck in. Same as if it's understeering a little bit. Sometimes what you have to, if it's oversteering a little bit, sorry, sometimes what you have to do is just be that little bit smoother getting back on the throttle, unweight the front a little bit, and it will push out. So we can utilize this to help change the understeer and oversteer of the car. In a full drive, it's a little bit trickier because we brake on the front tire. If you're too aggressive on the front, on the brake and steering, you'll actually understeer a little bit because you're going past where that tire can provide any more traction. But when you get it right with a full drive, that trail braking technique on the brake, smoothly let off the brake as you steer, the car will tuck in and turn tighter than if you just steered the corner without that transition braking. So look, in summary, these are three fundamental characteristics. All rubber tires share these. Doesn't matter what surface you're on. The traction increases with load. So look for where your tires are being pushed in the track, up the face of jump, going up hills. And conversely, if you're going over the top of a crest or you're in the air, you can't get as much steering or as much traction out of the car. So don't try to overdrive it in those situations. The slip angle, the amount of slip that the tire is getting, try to feel for that optimum position. Try to feel for where, if you push it a bit harder, it gets quicker. Or if you push it a bit harder, well, it suddenly starts to lose traction. Try to feel that bit there. And especially with your steering, don't use too much steering in the fast sections. Use lots of steering in the tight stuff, not so much in the fast stuff. And keep that front tire in the maximum grip area here. And finally, the friction circle. You've paid for a whole lot of traction out of your tire. Make sure you use all of that traction. So blend your throttle, blend your braking and your steering. Into a corner, brake, come off the brake smoothly as you steer. Come off the steering smoothly as you accelerate. Don't try to do full acceleration and full steering at the same time. Blend those together. To put these techniques together, I've previously done a video on mental visualization techniques. These can help you practice this before you get to the track, but nothing beats getting down to the track, trying a couple of these techniques out. Pick a couple of corners, have a listen to the car, try and work on that there. I hope this has been interesting for you. I hope this has explained some of the characteristics of tyres that you may have been confused about, or it might help you. I'm hoping it helps you get some more traction out of your car. Any questions, feel free, please drop me a message on Ask Ray Munday, send me a PM. If you've got lots of questions that need more follow-up, I'm happy to do some more videos or maybe a live video down the track if people want to know more information on this stuff. I'd like to take the opportunity to thank my awesome sponsors, Team Associated, J Concepts, Reedy, One Up Racing. I hope you enjoy this video and look forward to seeing you at the track soon. Thanks very much.